So what we're going to do today is, oh my goodness, we have some great specific questions. I also have some new stuff I'd love to share. And of course, I love the real-time questions. So let's just do it up. All right, shall we? All right. All right, cool beans. So here we go. So let's start. This is oh, the other thing. Sorry, I just want to give a quick shout out here. I've gotten some great feedback, and I personally, this feedback really resonates with me. So I want to just share it with you here now, which is obviously the Ignite program has a lot in it. So for example, we've got the step-by-step program, we've got the concierge, and like within there's for questions and issues that, let's say, almost everybody has, like cravings or eating on the go, things like that, these big topics. We've done everything we can to make sure there's a huge amount of resources available in the step-by-step program for those things, or like helping your entire family to go sane, that kind of stuff. Those big kind of macro topics, those are covered in detail in the step-by-step program. Then there's some questions, for example, like in the support group, which your SANE coaches and other family members are doing such a great job providing guidance on. So what I'd love to be able to do on these calls is make it like, the stuff we're going to do on these calls can only happen on these calls. So if I ever, refer, like, please check out the support group or please check out the step-by-step program, it's not because I don't sort of want to help at all. In fact, I want to help so much that we've got resources in place to give the most help with those topics. And I want to cover new cutting edge stuff that we can't cover anywhere else in these calls. So if that's okay, I hope I don't offend anybody by kind of not getting to certain things, but I want to maximize what we can do on these calls. And then I want to have our step-by-step program and all the other stuff in your Ignite program and in your support group. I want to make sure those are of best service to you as well. So hopefully that makes sense and helps. So let's rock and roll, shall we? So let me give you a specific example of something that we need to cover in these calls here together. So this is a really important point. And I've never actually talked about this before. And you probably never heard this before, and it's extremely important. So I noticed that somebody in the support group, I think, it's been kind of crazy. That's why I haven't cut my hair or shaved, because it's been a really busy time. But I think there was a comment in the support group. I was reading it on my phone, and it was something along the lines of, I use coconut oil and MCT oil, which is an abbreviation for medium chain triglyceride, because I think it burns fat, or something along those lines. And there's a lot of information on the internet in general, but there's a lot of misinformation on the internet that talks about either short chain fats or coconut oil or MCT oil causing you to burn fat. Now, this is a great example. And oh my goodness, like with all of this stuff, I mean, even with calorie counting, it's like, yeah, that's kind of true, but it's not the whole story. And in fact, because it's not the whole story, if you take it literally or you take it the wrong way, it can be really damaging. So let me give you, this is so important, such a concrete example. Okay, so if you ever hear someone say, hey, coconut oil helps you burn fat, or MCT oil, which is a concentrated form of a specific type of fat that is found within coconut oil, helps you to burn fat, that could be interpreted as follows. If I take my existing sane or insane diet and I just drink MCT oil, or I just eat 2 tablespoons of coconut oil per day, that will help me burn fat. And that's a totally reasonable interpretation of someone communicating to you, hey, coconut oil and MCT oil helps you burn fat. But here's the full truth, all right? Because this is really, really important. The actual science, which is like, it's like a game of telephone. So some of these things, they're based in science, but then it goes through like 15 media outlets and 5 internet chat rooms, and then it gets watered down. So what's actually been shown in studies is what the researchers will do is they will take a existing diet, like, so 2,000 calorie diet that has a certain composition of protein, carbohydrate, and fat. And then they will do an isocaloric swap, which means they will take, say, 400 calories of some other form of fat, and they will replace that with either coconut oil or MCT oil, or these medium chain triglycerides, or these sort of fat burning fats. Now, the scientific fact is when you do that, when you do a calorie for calorie swap of if you took 300 calories of long chain saturated fats and you swapped them out and swapped an equal number of medium chain fats in, you would burn fat, because those medium chain fats are processed differently than long chain fats. To use the same terminology, you could think of them as being less efficient. So we talk about protein, right? If you do a isocaloric, meaning if you were to take 300 calories of sugar and you replaced them with 300 calories of protein, you would burn more body fat, because protein is less efficient at being stored as fat than sugar is. Well, medium chain fats are less efficient at being stored as body fat than long chain fats. So, but it's not true to say that if you just eat more medium chain fats, so for example, say someone's eating a really unhealthy McDonald's-based diet, what they'll do is they'll read these things on the internet and they'll say, oh, okay, I'm just going to eat 4 tablespoons of coconut oil in addition to the sort of low quality diet. Why am I not losing fat? That's why. So, and you can see how that's kind of a half truth, right? And even with protein, we talk about protein being inefficient, but we always talk about eating more vegetables, proteins, and fats instead of, or in place of, starches and sweets. And that's very different than, so for example, if you took a 3,000 calorie diet and just started drinking protein shakes, that is not going to do, that's not going to do what we want it to do. You want to take the saner foods, or in this case, the less efficient fats, and you swap those in place of insane food. So I hope that helps. And it's actually really important, because this individual, and oil in general is a really important thing to talk about, because remember, oil is not sane. That doesn't mean it's unhealthy, but it means it's not sane, because oil is not a whole food fat. It's the fat from a whole food extracted out. So it's refined, concentrated fat. That doesn't mean we should never use oil, but it does mean that I think this individual was led to believe that they should use coconut oil liberally because it burns fat. So now we know coconut oil does not in and of itself burn fat. So in order for coconut oil to burn fat, in order for anything to burn fat, it would actually have to use up more calories being processed by the body than it put into the body. Those foods exist. Like, that's what most non-starchy vegetables are. Most non-starchy vegetables are basically pure fiber and protein. So to actually metabolize and digest celery, it actually is what we call a negative calorie food. To actually take celery from being celery to being something that your body can do something with, so breaking it down to water and to breaking it down into the teeny tiny bit of sugar that's in it, breaking down the protein elements, breaking down the fiber elements, and then eventually excreting the fiber out of your body, that costs your body more energy than celery provides. So there are these sort of negative calorie foods. Oil is not one of those. It's not even close to one of those. So oil is not the devil. It's not like, oh, I'm going to go away right after Jonathan finishes this call, go throw away all my oil. But like, there is no the only reason to use oil. Let me be very clear about this, because this can be a big difference maker for you. Because oil is not sane, right? There's no fiber in it, none, zero. There's no protein and there's no water. So the three key components that are the common denominators across satiety, aggression, nutrition, and efficiency, none of them are in oil. So that's why oil is in other fats in the same spectrum, right? So the only reason to use oil is because you have to, and I would actually I would encourage you to explore ways where you don't have to use it at all, or you can use a lot less of it. Like, for example, I eat a lot of eggs. Eggs are super sane, but you can take, I think, for example, my mother just, I've seen her cook and it's delicious and I love her and she's a fantastic cook, but she just kind of scoops oil and puts it in the pan, and it's way more oil than could ever be needed to prevent the thing from sticking to the pan. I mean, you can go, I've got a big old tub of coconut oil, because coconut oil is a great oil to cook with because it has a high smoke point and it doesn't get all mangled and turns into trans fats. It does not, like polyunsaturated fats would if you cooked with them. But just a teeny tiny bit will coat the bottom of the pan and cause things not to stick. And that's great, because since it's not sane, you don't want to go out of your way to eat more of it. And other things like salmon. Salmon is super sane, and pan-seared salmon, delicious. But what we've been kind of programmed to do is like, you just put oil in the pan, right? Put olive oil in the pan, which is probably not the best option. It's not a terrible option, but it's not the best option. Put some coconut oil in the pan. Like, the assumption is we have to put oil in the pan. But there's cooking techniques such as braising and boiling or broiling that can be great ways to still have delicious flavor and delicious taste. But like when you're cooking that piece of salmon, just lay down a thin layer of water in the bottom of your pan, and that'll prevent it from sticking, and it'll add wonderful moisture to the fish. And I mean, I just think it's a really important thing to do, because it's sort of indiscriminate use of oil does not increase your sanity at all. It's not sane. And anyone who tells you that these fats burn fat are only telling you a half truth, because what the research has actually shown is only when they are swapped, only when you take more efficiently processed fats by your body and you swap in these less efficient fats, which are good for you, only then do they contribute to fat loss. And I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, please post a question as a question in the chat box. But that's a big, 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 big important distinction to make. And hopefully that's a great example of the kind of stuff that I want to cover in these calls, because that it requires a lot of nuance and it requires a lot of caveating. So hopefully that is helpful here. So anyway, and please just again, keep in mind that another way to think about oils is, remember, whole food fats is very important, right? So when anyone talks about healthy oils, we have to think about this in terms of oil is refined fat. So why am I making this point? What is sugar, right? Like, most sugar comes from whole foods. Sugar cane or sugar beets are two of the primary sources. Now, to be frank, if you were to sit around and chew on sugar cane, like, you'd be fine, because you would never consume enough sugar for it to be an issue. But when we take sugar cane and we extract out concentrated sugar, it's really easy to overdo it, okay? It's really easy to overdo it with extracted out concentrated fat. Again, it doesn't mean olive oil is bad for you. It doesn't mean coconut oil is bad for you. But it does mean, if the words olives and coconut are in your brain, like, just stop there. Eat more olives, eat more coconut, eat more of the whole food, rather than just taking all the fiber, all the protein, all the water out, and then being left with just concentrated fat. It's like the same thing with juicing versus blending. The reason I love blending so much is blending is taking a whole food and essentially just pre-chewing it for you. But all the fiber is there, all the nutrients are there, all the sanity is still intact. Whereas, it's actually a funny story. Here's another thing we can only ever do on these calls, is I share information with you that I don't share anywhere else. So you may remember there was a television show a while back. It was the Bethany Frankel show, I think, or something like that. Anyway, I was scheduled to be on that show, and I was going to debate the guy, I think his name is like Joe the Juicer, and he produced a movie called Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. He's Australian, I believe. And he sells juicers and whatever. Juicing is his thing. And I was so excited because the whole point of the debate was like, is going on a juice only diet healthy? And I was like, my goodness, this is, I mean, it wasn't even really going to be a debate. It was going to be with, much love and sensitivity. But like, if all you do is drink juice, you're basically on a sugar only diet and you're missing out on all sorts of essential nutrients. Anyway, but what is juice? Juice are whole foods with all the fiber removed. And that's just like there's that we want the whole food. Like if there's one thing that almost everyone is agreeing with or through is that food in its natural whole state whenever possible is your best bet. So anyway, hopefully that is helpful. I do see that I got a question here live from Am, and it's the first live question, so I want to give it preferential treatment. All right, and Am asks, when you eat cottage cheese with 25 grams of protein, there is 10 grams of fat in count, both protein and fat. If so, how much? Am, so I'm sorry, I might be misunderstanding your question, but I think this might have to do a little bit with SANE scoring. Specifically, I think you're probably eating whole fat cottage cheese because, for example, skim or low fat cottage cheese, I don't think would have 10 grams of fat in it. But yeah, if you eat, for example, like a fatty piece of meat, generally speaking, if the food is going to be giving you about 150 calories from fat, that would count as a serving of whole food fats. Now, if the food only contains 10 grams of fat, that's 9 times 10 is 90 calories from fat. Depending on your body size, if you are very small, or if your optimal body size is very small and petite, then 100 calories worth of fat may count as a serving of whole food fat. But if you are of an average size, or if your body structure would be of an average size, if you were at your ideal body composition, then it's usually more like 140 calories. So, I mean, yeah, if you're eating a lot of cottage cheese, maybe you'd round up eventually and count a serving of whole food fats in addition to protein for that. But if it's just 90 calories from fat, no, it would not need to count as a serving of whole food fat. All right, so some other good questions here. There was a question from last week, which I didn't get to, and I always promise that I will bring them forward to the next calls. And this one was, my family will not give up spaghetti night, but I found a rotini at Trader Joe's made from only black beans. Family loved it. Then I found pastas made of chickpeas, edamame, adzuki beans, and mung beans, respectively, at Sprouts, which I believe is another store like Trader Joe's or those types of places. I have been trying them out as well. No grains in the ingredients. All have 14 to 25 grams of protein and 9 to 13 grams of fiber per serving of 50 grams. Since this has brought some peace to my family, I was wondering about how you feel about these bean pastas as a substitute for wheat pastas. Great question. Great question. So first of all, I love the way that question is phrased. How do you feel about bean pastas as a substitute for wheat pastas? The reason I just love that phrasing of the question is it's not like, are bean pastas good or bad? Because remember, that's a really, that depends on our goals. That depends on what we're eating them in place of. I mean, we have to be very strategic in how we think and how we talk. Because, for example, saying, are bean pastas sane or insane is a very different question than are bean pastas as a substitute for wheat pasta is a good idea. Totally different questions. And for example, I can tell you with 100% confidence, right? You'll often hear me on these calls give you answers which are like, well, maybe this, that, and the other thing, because the question could go in many different directions. But this question, bean pastas are without a doubt a saner, awesome alternative in place of wheat pastas. In this specific case, if you're looking at a 50-gram serving and like 13 grams of that are coming from fiber and 25 grams are coming from protein, then you're looking at, let's say in the 25-gram case, the thing you're eating there is 50% protein. If it's 50% protein, and even on the 9-gram end of the spectrum for fiber, almost, 50 plus 9 is, let's just round up and say 60. Or no, sorry, 25 plus 9. Well, that's well over. Yeah, so it's about 60%. About 60% of the net weight of what you're eating is coming from fiber and protein. And since that's a dry pasta, there's not going to be any water in it. That's why it's sort of dry pasta. So I would imagine the rest of it is going to be trace amounts of fat, but the rest will be carbs. Remember, carbs aren't bad. We just want to make sure we get our carbs from the sanest sources possible, non-starchy vegetables being the sanest source possible. But it sounds like, while I don't have personal experience with bean pastas, if 60% of the calories are coming from protein and from fiber, then the remaining calories coming from carbs are carbs coming from an extremely sane source. So again, carbs are not the enemy at all. We just want to make sure that carbs are coming from the sanest sources possible, from sources that are as high in water, fiber, and protein as possible. And of course, dry pasta doesn't have any water in it at all. But if even that said, 60% of it is coming from pure sane sources, those are a great, great substitute. And this is also a great question because, while beans are in the sort of the middle of the sane spectrum, right? They're not like, go out of your way to eat 12 servings of beans per day. It's also like when you do score beans, whether you're using the app or the website, the way the actual algorithm works is that you're not going to actually, your SANE score does not go down. For, I think, the first 1 or 2 servings of beans are just sort of thought of as neutral because they do have some benefit, but then if you eat too much of them, they do have some cost, whereas things like sugar and starch, those are actually going to drop your SANE score, whereas things like non-starchy vegetables really, really increase it. But these bean pastas, it sounds like they've even taken some of the sugar out. They've made beans and legumes even saner, which is totally possible, right? If you, for example, look at, there are things like for vegetarians and vegans, pea protein or rice protein, right? You can take rice and you can extract the protein out and you can end up with, while regular rice is probably something like 10% protein, this is just a guesstimation, the clean rice protein that's available in the SANE store is 60+% protein, and pea is even higher. You can get pea protein concentrate that's like 80+% protein, whereas a pea in and of itself, a legume, is going to be much lower, down like 20-30% range, I'm estimating. So yeah, it actually sounds like these bean pastas are almost like they took. So if these are just regular beans over here, and this is like a pea protein powder, it sounds like these pastas are like, boom, they're right in the middle. It's almost, so that's actually pretty brilliant. So whoever asked this question, thank you. And like, please, let's talk about this in the support group if we're not already, because those sound like they could be some awesome ways to increase our sanity. And, they sound like they might even be sane enough to not, sometimes we talk about things that are a bridge. So a bridge to getting saner, like it's a saner option, but it's not quite sane. This sounds like it's actually sane. So you no need to feel bad at all. So great question. Let me grab a little sip of water here. Oh, and the other thing, we're going to try to keep this to 90 minutes or until I pass out. So there's always that disclaimer. All right, so the next question here is, I do not eat meat, tofu, or dairy. After watching the How to Begin Sane videos, I've started to include eggs, cottage cheese, and seafood back into my meals. I do have a good vegetable protein that I use to make shakes. What is the best way to balance the protein needs to meet my SANE protein requirements? Again, very thankful for this question, because if you eat seafood and eggs, you're good. Done. If you just don't eat meat and you're what's called a pescatarian, which means you eat seafood and other animal products, but you don't eat meat, you can not only be sane, but you can be optimally sane. The optimal source of nutrient-dense protein is seafood. So if you're willing to eat seafood or even eggs, right? We talked about a few weeks ago, we talked about, and this is a good thing for us to cover in these calls. Just like we talk about a calorie isn't a calorie, and earlier we talked about fat isn't fat, right? We know this, like omega-6 fats are different from omega-3 fats, which are totally different from omega-9 fats, which are totally different from saturated fats. And within saturated fats, there's long chain saturated fats and medium chain saturated fats and short chain saturated fats. So just like a calorie isn't a calorie, a fat isn't a fat, a protein isn't a protein, sugar isn't sugar, right? There's fructose, there's galactose, there's lactose, there's maltose, there's all sorts of toses, and there's toast. I got my toses down here. Protein isn't protein. So protein is evaluated in terms of what's called biological value, or BV. And what that means is it's how much of the protein that you ingest can your body actually use. So this is, again, just another reason why the things we read in magazines or we hear sort of eighth hand on most websites just do such a bad job for us in terms of our wellness and our health, because we'll hear things, for example, like peanuts are a good source of protein. That unfortunately is misinformed for two reasons. First, if a food gets 70% of its calories from carbs or from fat, then it's potentially a good source of carbs or fat, not a good source of protein, right? Like if a food, even let's pick something that is sane. So eggs are totally sane, but an egg gets about 64% of its calories from fat. It's totally sane, but if it gets 64% of its calories from fat, it's a whole food fat, not a nutrient-dense protein. A nutrient-dense protein, or a concentrated good source of protein, gets more of its calories from protein than it gets from fat or carbohydrate. Because if it gets more of its calories from fat than anything else, well, then it's a fat. And if it gets more of its calories from carbs than anything else, then it's a carb. And if it gets more of its calories from protein than anything else, then it's a protein. So when people say things like quinoa is a good source of protein, what they're actually saying is, relative to other grains, quinoa is higher in protein. That's what they really, put it this way, that's the truth. The truth is quinoa has more protein in it than rice. That is true. But now to say that quinoa is a good source of protein is false. Reason for that is quinoa is going to provide you with like 3 or 4 times more carbs than it is going to provide you with protein. That in and of itself doesn't mean it's not good for you, but it does mean it's not a good source of protein. In addition to that, the protein that quinoa does provide has a low biological value, meaning that your body cannot make use of all of it. So it's not, I mean, as you could potentially imagine, the protein that comes from a plant, like the reason your body needs protein is it's going to synthesize it into human tissue. So you could probably imagine just intuitively that, for example, well, so I always talk about, spinach. You wouldn't think this, but spinach, calorie for calorie, is higher in protein than a fatty steak is. Now, of course, you're never going to eat 600 calories of spinach, so there's no way to get enough protein from spinach. But the point is even if spinach does have a high percentage of protein, which it does relative to other vegetables, and even if quinoa does have protein, more protein relative to other grains, it's still sort of low on an absolute scale. And then in terms of a biological availability, it just cannot be synthesized by the body readily. Whereas animal sources of protein, or even dairy is an animal source of protein, eggs, egg whites, these have an extremely high biological value. So specifically, egg whites are actually the standard. The biological value scale is from 0 to 100, and an egg white, or I think egg white or egg, is a complete protein. It is the sort of standard. And then there are things, and I don't really know, this doesn't really make sense, but there are things like whey protein, which are above 100, which doesn't really make sense. But I think when they developed the scale, whey protein wasn't really a common thing. And then they measured it and were like, it breaks the scale. So it should now be the standard, but it's not. So the point is if you're eating seafood and you're eating eggs, and you can also eat egg whites, I mean, those are brilliant, delicious, super nutrient dense sources of protein. They have extremely high biological availability, which means your body can make use of them. And that's extremely important.